Okay, take out your Chapter 6, Section 1 reading notes that you worked on in class today, and we're going to try to go over some of these things. I'm going to try to do this as quickly as I can, get you through this. Our goal for this presentation is to prepare us for Wednesday's kind of discussion about Alexander Hamilton and discovering Alexander Hamilton. So what we're looking at are really just kind of three basic questions. The last one, I hope, is the easiest one to answer for us. And the first two are a little bit more complex. You know, how does a new government, after the ratification of the Constitution, how does a new government get started? What needed, let's change that, what needed to be prioritized? That is, what were the issues that they had to deal with first? And then who will lead? Who is going to be the, not only, we can probably list all the guys that we know who are going to be the leaders, but of that group, who's going to prove to be more important maybe than others. So let's move into a concept that I'd like for you to be familiar with, and it's actually a term that I'd like you to be familiar with, a precedent. Not a president, but a precedent, P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. And a precedent it's an original act, right? It's something that is an example that can and or will be followed. You can set a precedent. And if I want you, the context that I want you to think about that in is, who was the first president of the United States? Would he be in a position to set precedents? What kind of precedents did he set? And these are good things to maybe have in your notes in terms of the importance of that first presidency. And so if you look at that first presidency, obviously it's George Washington. And what were some of the precedents that he set? A simple one, the inaugural address. He gives a speech after he's inaugurated, and this sets a precedent that all presidents that follow will do also. They will address the people assembled, kind of set their agenda and what it is that they hope to accomplish as President of the United States. But a precedent that President Washington established that is maybe the most lasting precedent is the creation of a cabinet. And what is a cabinet? Well, it's a group of people that you bring together. You appoint them to specific offices or specific duties or responsibilities that you have. It's the idea of delegating executive authority, so powers that the president has. You take those and delegate those out to other individuals who are maybe experts in those fields or have more time to spend specifically on that field. Things like the Treasury, Secretary of State, an Attorney General, Secretary of War. Eventually we'll change that to Secretary of Defense. Those kinds of things that the president couldn't dedicate all his time to. He wants to have people who are thinking about that constantly. Here is Washington's first cabinet. Obviously we have George Washington here, and of all these four, of the five guys here, I only want you to remember the three: President Washington, and then the two kind of main figures in his cabinet. Here is Alexander Hamilton. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. And then here is Thomas Jefferson, and he was the Secretary of State. And these two guys are going to be really important because they're going to come to represent two very different political philosophies that existed within George Washington's cabinet. When we talk about establishing priorities, kind of going back to this question, how does the new government get started, and what needs to be prioritized? We talk about establishing priorities. What were the most important issues facing this new country? How do you provide that new government stability? How can that be achieved? What did they, Washington and the cabinet, have the legal means to do? That is, what did this new Constitution allow for and prohibit? And these are the kinds of things that we need to talk about in class tomorrow, that I want you to think about in class tomorrow. And so, just to give you a kind of an intro to how we're going to approach these, we'll look specifically at Hamilton. Hamilton is going to answer all of these. What's the most important issue? Well, Hamilton's going to say the most important issue is financial well-being of the country. That we had to somehow address the debt crisis. That this new government that he pushed very hard for by writing the Federalist Papers needed to, work with its new power to tax. That the government, that there had to be an ability of the government to finance and pay off that debt. That was the number one issue. That we could have no credibility with ourselves or anybody else in the world if we weren't able to make good on our debt. Why would anybody ever loan us money again? Why would anybody ever trade with us again if we can't prove to pay off our own debt? In addition to that, Hamilton is also going to believe in answering this last question: what did they have the legal means to do, and what does this new Constitution allow for or prohibit? He believes in a prominence of the new federal government. I would almost say a dominance of the new federal government, that they have the power to do essentially whatever it is that they need to do to get things done. We're going to take a look at a clause in the Constitution when we're looking at discovering Hamilton in class tomorrow on Wednesday, to kind of reveal some of those ideas. So for Hamilton, and that's who we're going to focus on, when he answers these questions, what were the most important issues facing the new country? It is debt, financial well-being, financial prosperity. How to provide the new government stability, to provide it with financial stability. And how could that be achieved? Well, Hamilton believes it's going to be through the power to tax. It's going to be through the assumption of debt. It's going to be through a number of things. So if we look at what Hamilton, why Hamilton's going to, his view is going to really rise to prominence in the government, it's plain and simple, is that Washington favors Hamilton and his ideas. This is an image of, you put this image next to this one, the rest of the cabinet's gone. We have just Washington and Hamilton here, and he is his closest advisor. He will be the leading advisor to George Washington, and together they will push Hamilton's plan to strengthen the American economy. The questions we will need to address tomorrow night in our second part of this presentation will be, is that all legal? Well, the things that they want to do, are they legal? And so what I would encourage you to do is take a look at, in preparation for what we're going to do in terms of discovering Hamilton tomorrow, we're really going to focus in on his programs. But I wanted to give you an idea of the genesis of his programs. I would encourage you to look at that table at the top of page, I think it's page 195 or 196. And there's a table at the top of the page that kind of just quickly goes over Hamilton's financial programs. And the focus is on debt, the power to tax, giving the government the ability to finance debt, and also the idea of giving the government the strength to do whatever it needs to do to get through whatever crisis it might have. So if we look back here, how does the new government, after ratification, get started? Well, it gets started through a number of precedents. It organizes itself, and it begins the process of governing. As that starts to happen, what we see is there are going to be people who rise to positions of leadership. Obviously, Washington is the first president, but through some of his decisions, like the precedent of establishing a cabinet, there are going to be other voices that end up being very prominent also. Key among those for our studies right now is Alexander Hamilton. So the new government gets started by the same way that the country got started, that is through charismatic leaders who push for their thoughts and their philosophies to prevail. What needed to be prioritized? Well, there we have to look at whose voice is leading, and it's Hamilton. And so since he's leading, what needed to be prioritized was finances and the country's finances, the debt crisis, how the debt crisis was going to be addressed, and then how the debt crisis was eventually going to be paid off. And who will lead? In short, George Washington's going to lead, but he's going to do it with Hamilton right on his shoulder, giving him advice constantly. So what we're going to do in class tomorrow is we're going to take this and really explore what Hamilton suggested, and then we'll have a second presentation for the same section in the chapter tomorrow night, which is going to get into, now that we know what he presented, how does that then lead to the political arguments that question whether or not any of it was even legal. So in review, how does the new government get started? It starts itself with charismatic leaders who have a philosophy and a vision for the country. What need to be prioritized? Because we know who rises to prominence, finances. And who will lead? I'm going to say Hamilton through Washington. Okay? Hopefully you took some notes in that right-hand section. As I've been looking around class, I noticed that not many people have been. What I would like for you to do right now is to go to my website, scroll down to the online assessments, and I just want to have an idea before we come into class on Wednesday as to where we're all at with understanding what I've presented here tonight. So please take the short form on Hamilton Part 1.